Officer Ethan Caldwell believed it was merely another routine stop until he brandished a weapon against the wife of the FBI director within minutes. His entire career crumbled. The flashing lights in the rearview mirror didn't catch Regina Owens off guard. With a sigh, she tightened her grip on the steering wheel as she guided her black Audi Q7 to the roadside. The residences along the serene street in Brentwood, Tennessee were impressive and immaculate, their manicured lawns soaking up the early evening sunlight. She was well acquainted with this neighborhood, having lived here with her husband, Samuel Owens, the director of the FBI, for over a decade. However, she was also aware of how the situation appeared. A black woman alone in an upscale vehicle driving through an area where individuals like her still faced scrutiny. Her gaze flicked to the rearview mirror. The officer had yet to exit his vehicle, but she could already sense what lay ahead. Regina grabbed her phone and hit record before setting it down on the passenger seat. Not that she anticipated this incident going viral, but she understood better than to depend on someone else's account of events. Then, the patrol car's door swung open, and Officer Ethan Caldwell emerged, embodying the kind of arrogant authority born from years of unchecked power. He was in his late 40s, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that seemed to have forgotten the meaning of a smile years ago. His uniform was crisp, his badge shone brightly, his belt stocked with tools of intimidation. He approached deliberately, each step intentional, his hand already hovering near his holster. Regina exhaled through her nose. "Here we go." Caldwell halted just behind her window, intent on forcing her to tilt her neck to regard him. "License and registration," he stated monotonously. Regina kept her hands firmly on the wheel. "Could you tell me why you pulled me over?" Caldwell's gaze narrowed. "You didn't signal at that last turn." Regina blinked, having taken this route countless times. She was sure she signaled. She nodded slowly, more for her own assurance than for him. "All right," she replied. "My license and registration are in my purse. I'm going to retrieve them now." Caldwell didn't reply immediately. His gaze simply swept over her face, then drifted to her tailored blazer, the elegant gold bracelet on her wrist, and her well-manicured nails. He was assessing her. A slow smirk twitched at his lips. "Go ahead, but move slowly." Regina resisted the instinctive surge of anger. She had been in this game before. She reached carefully, deliberately, and extracted the documents, passing them to him. Caldwell took them silently, but instead of inspecting them, he stood there, observing her, waiting. Regina allowed the silence to linger until he finally glanced at her license. His expression flickered for just an instant, but he quickly masked it. "Do you live around here?" he queried casually, as if engaged in trivial chatter at a grocery store. Regina's jaw tightened. "Yes, about 2 miles down the road." Caldwell clicked his tongue. "Really?" He examined the address again. "What brings you this way?" Regina chuckled under her breath, shaking her head. "I wasn't aware that I needed a reason to drive in my own neighborhood." Caldwell's eyes snapped back to her, his smirk fading. "Ma'am, I'm just doing my job." Regina held his gaze. "No, you're not." The words landed like a slap. Caldwell's stance stiffened as his shoulders squared, his fingers twitching near his holster. The atmosphere in the car shifted. A subtle transition, but Regina felt the change from arrogance to a more perilous attitude. "I'd be cautious with that attitude," Caldwell warned, his voice lowering. "You're making this a lot harder than it needs to be." Regina tilted her head, her heart racing, but her demeanor remained composed. "How exactly am I making this harder?" Caldwell continued to stare at her, the moment stretching too long. Then with a scoff, he turned and retreated to his cruiser, still clutching her documents. Regina inhaled slowly, pressing her hands against the leather steering wheel in an effort to ground herself. She had encountered this type before, officers who sought control, who wanted her to feel small. But she refused to feel small, not today. She glanced at her phone, still recording, sensing she may need it. However, Caldwell was not finished yet. Ethan Caldwell sat in his patrol car, fixated on the license in his hand. Regina Owens. The name wasn't familiar, but something about the address caused him to hesitate. He glanced in the rearview mirror, his eyes narrowing at the black Audi still parked beneath the golden glow of a street lamp. She didn't seem nervous, which irritated him. Most individuals, particularly women, became flustered during stops, tripping over their words, desperate to comply to avoid trouble. But she sat there, calm and composed, as if she had no fear of him. And that unsettled him more than it ought to have. He wasn't a bad cop. He had served on the force for over 20 years, doing his job efficiently and effectively. He had a reputation, strict, no nonsense, and respected. He didn't bend rules and wasted no time in small talk, and certainly didn't tolerate attitude from those who believed themselves above questioning. Ethan exhaled through his nose, still holding her license. She had pushed back just enough to challenge him. That smirk in her voice, the manner in which she refused to hurry to justify herself, and the way she calmly met his gaze, she knew something he didn't. His fingers tapped against the dashboard. A woman like her in a car like that in a neighborhood like this, something about it didn't sit right. Perhaps it was merely instinct. But Ethan had learned over the years that his instincts were never wrong. He looked at the computer mounted on his dashboard and entered her name, Regina Owens. Married, no criminal history, no prior offenses, nothing to warrant further pursuit. But his gut told him he needed to press on. His radio crackled. Unit 22. Status check. Ethan lifted the receiver. Routine traffic stop. No backup needed. A pause, and the dispatcher responded. Copy that. Unit 22. Ethan set the receiver down, staring once more at the computer screen. There was nothing indicating a reason to escalate, and yet he wanted to, because something about her felt too calm, too confident in herself. People were not supposed to feel assured when pulled over. They needed to be nervous. That was to prevent them from becoming a problem. His gaze snapped back to the Audi. She still remained there, her silhouette relaxed. Ethan clenched his jaw. He could not allow her to walk away from this. Believing she had gained the upper hand, his decision was made before he even comprehended it. He shoved her license and registration under his arm, pushed open the door, and stepped out. His boots hit the pavement with a solid thud as he approached her vehicle again. Moving slower this time, more purposely, he halted by her window once more. Regina shifted her gaze, her expression still inscrutable. Everything good. Officer Ethan scrutinized her for a moment, then leaned down slightly, placing his hands on the door frame of her car. You got somewhere to be? He inquired, his voice smooth but tinged with a weightier tone. Regina blinked once. Home. Ethan released a slow breath, allowing the silence to linger between them. Then he did something he knew would irritate her. He smirked. Funny, you don't seem like someone who resides in this neighborhood. He observed the slight alteration in her expression. It was subtle, a mere shift in her eyes, a flicker of something colder behind them. Regina inhaled sharply, exhaled slowly through her mouth, maintaining her control. And you don't appear to be a cop who adheres to protocol. She replied evenly. The smirk on Ethan's face wavered momentarily, but he quickly regained himself, his fingers drumming against the top of her vehicle. He could feel the weight of his holster at his side, the badge on his chest, the years of authority that had never come under scrutiny. Not until now. He thought she was lucky tonight, but he wasn't ready to let her go just yet. Regina's pulse remained steady, yet she could sense the shift in the atmosphere. Ethan Caldwell was testing her, pushing to determine how far he could go before she reacted. This was no longer about a traffic violation. She had encountered men like him before, officers who wielded their badges like weapons, who were disinterested in enforcing the law, but in enforcing obedience. Those who felt the need to remind individuals, especially those like her, who was in charge. Regina took a slow breath, keeping her focus on him. She wouldn't grant him that satisfaction. If you have my information, officer, am I free to leave? she inquired, her tone steady. Caldwell tilted his head slightly, feigning amusement. What's the rush? Regina didn't flinch. I have nothing else to say. Either issue me a ticket or let me go. For a moment he remained silent, simply standing there, observing her, weighing his options. Then suddenly, he reached for the door handle. Regina's entire body tensed. She locked the door just as his fingers neared it, her heart racing against her ribs. But she kept her expression impassive. Caldwell's face hardened. Step out of the vehicle, he commanded, his voice carrying an edge. Now the casual, condescending demeanor was absent. Regina glared at him. On what grounds? Caldwell straightened, his hand moving toward his hip. Do I really need to articulate that for you? Regina understood where this was heading, knew that if she twitched in the slightest, he would assert she was resisting, that she was being obstinate, that she posed a threat. She also knew something else. He had no clue who she was. Regina exhaled, rolling her shoulders back, having given him ample opportunity to de-escalate, which he had willingly ignored. She slowly reached for her phone, never breaking eye contact. I'm recording, she declared. Caldwell let out a mirthless chuckle. Oh, you think that intimidates me? He leaned in slightly. Lady, have you any idea how many times I've heard that before? His fingers twitched dangerously near his holster, just enough to serve as a warning. Regina noticed it. So did the residents in the nearby houses, a few of whom began to emerge. A man across the street in his work clothes drew out his phone, while an older woman walking her dog stopped completely, her mouth agape as she took in the scene. Good. If Caldwell desired an audience, he was going to receive one. Regina turned her phone toward him. Badge number, she asked, her voice raised enough for the onlookers to hear. Caldwell's jaw tightened, and for the first time, he appeared uncertain, but he concealed it quickly. I said step out of the car. He repeated, more firmly this time. Regina remained motionless. Are you refusing to comply? He pressed. She met his intense gaze. Unshaken. I'll exit, she stated. When you contact your superior and inform them that you just pulled over the wife of the FBI director. The word struck like a bomb. For the first time, Caldwell actually blinked. A flash of hesitation crossed his face, and his hand, which had been moving toward his gun, froze. The man across the street, still filming, stepped closer. Did she just say FBI? He murmured. Caldwell's nostrils flared. He wasn't going to back down. He had come too far for that. But the seeds of doubt were now sown, and Regina recognized it, as did everyone else. However, Caldwell was not finished yet. For the first time that evening, Ethan Caldwell hesitated. Regina detected the split-second pause, the tightening of his jaw, the adjustment in his stance. She had found a crack. But hesitation did not equate to retreat. He squared his shoulders, reiterating, step out of the car now. Regina remained firm, her phone still recording, held aloft for anyone watching to see. I requested your superior, she reminded him, calm yet assertive. Unless you possess probable cause, I am legally within my rights to stay inside my vehicle. The crowd expanded, more neighbors trickling out with phones ready. The atmosphere shifted. She was no longer the one appearing threatening. Ethan's pulse raced. He had command. He had always maintained control. But now this woman, this damn woman, was painting him as weak. And he wouldn't tolerate weakness. His hand fell to his holster. Last chance. Lady, he said, his voice lowered, now more menacing. Open the door, or I'll make you do it. Regina sensed it before she even witnessed it. That pivotal change. The moment where everything escalated to life or death. She had encountered high-stakes situations before, witnessing firsthand the manner in which power was misused, how a uniform and a gun could transform a man into a monster. She had been prepared for a simple traffic stop, but a gun in her face? That was beyond expectation. However, that is precisely what transpired. Caldwell's fingers clenched around the grip of his weapon, drawing it from its holster. The movement smooth and practiced, almost too effortless. Regina had scarcely time to react before gasps erupted from the bystanders. A woman's voice cut through the heavy atmosphere. "What the hell is he doing?" A man's voice joined in. "He just pulled a gun on her." The once tranquil street erupted into chaos. Regina felt a chill race up her spine. Yet she didn't yield, didn't flinch, didn't waver. Instead, she locked eyes with him and called his bluff. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," she stated loudly enough for everyone to hear, the words slicing through the night. Caldwell didn't lower the firearm, his breathing faltering now, the reality of his actions flooding in. But he couldn't retreat. Not in front of all these witnesses. Not with cameras recording. Then came footsteps. Fast and urgent. A new voice. Sharp with authority. "Officer Caldwell." "Stand down." Caldwell froze. The voice projected from behind him. He turned slightly and recognized another officer, Sergeant Raymond Briggs. Briggs wasn't just some officer. He was his commanding officer, and his expression radiated pure fury. "Lower your damn weapon now." Caldwell's grip tightened. He felt his control waning, but he had already lost. Regina could see it, and so could the rest of the crowd, but the damage was already inflicted. Caldwell's fingers quivered around the gun's grip, his body betraying him. The gravity of his decision, his mistake, finally beginning to settle. Regina refrained from movement, not daring to breathe too deeply. She knew better. A gun in the hands of a man like Caldwell wasn't merely a tool. It was an extension of his ego. Behind him, Sergeant Raymond Briggs was not playing games. "I said lower your weapon." Briggs barked, stepping closer. Now, Caldwell's jaw tightened. His mind spun, ruminating on a way out. He faced two options: comply or escalate further. His nostrils flared, his fingers tensed. And then, ultimately, he relinquished it. He didn't holster the gun immediately, but lowered it enough to prompt a collective exhale from the crowd. "Holster it." Briggs commanded now. Caldwell hesitated before. With a sharp exhale, he shoved the weapon back into its place. Briggs then turned to Regina. "Ma'am, are you all right?" She kept her gaze fixed on Caldwell. "I would like my license and registration back." Caldwell remained motionless. Briggs stepped in closer. "Hand them over." Caldwell's hands twitched. Now he extracted the documents from his chest pocket, flinging them onto Regina's dashboard. As if they were refused, Regina received them without comment. Briggs turned back to her. "Would you like to file a formal complaint?" Regina exhaled slowly, her pulse still steadier than it ought to be. Then she locked eyes with Caldwell. "There's something he needs to hear first." Briggs frowned. "Ma'am." Regina adjusted in her seat, turning slightly so Caldwell could better see her, fully recognize her. "My name is Regina Owens," she stated, her voice resolute. "My husband is Samuel Owens, director of the FBI." Silence engulfed the scene. Caldwell's complexion paled. His lips parted slightly, his mind attempting to grasp what he had just heard. Briggs stiffened, his gaze darting between Regina and Caldwell, his composure shifting instantly. Regina allowed the weight of her words to settle, then added, "And you just pulled a gun on me." The murmurs, gasps, and whispers surged from the crowd, transforming the previously tense air into something else entirely. Caldwell appeared sick for the first time that night. He finally comprehended the magnitude of his actions and realized unequivocally that his career had come to an end. Regina reached for her phone and stopped the recording. She had collected everything she needed. But Caldwell's nightmare had only just begun. Caldwell's chest rose and fell too rapidly. His breath came in shallow gasps, the weight of the moment bearing down heavily upon him. Sergeant Briggs's face remained inscrutable, but his silence conveyed everything. The street, once busy with murmurs, was now eerily quiet. Briggs stepped slowly toward Caldwell, keeping his voice low yet firm. You just pulled a gun on the wife of the FBI director. Caldwell swallowed hard, his throat dry. She was being uncooperative. He stammered, his voice friendlier than before. Briggs's eyes blazed with disbelief. Uncooperative? You escalated a routine stop into a damn incident. You brandished a weapon against a woman who committed no crime. Briggs's voice dropped low and cold. Now you're done. Caldwell's stomach churned. His mouth opened. Yet words failed him. Briggs didn't wait for him to conjure excuses. Instead, he faced Regina. Ma'am, I need to offer a formal apology on behalf of this department. This should have never happened. Regina nodded once, though her face remained impassive. She wasn't there for apologies. She sought accountability. Briggs tapped his radio to dispatch. I need Internal Affairs notified immediately. Officer Caldwell is being placed on administrative leave effective immediately. Caldwell flinched, his world unraveling in real time. A voice crackled through the radio. Copy that. Sergeant Briggs returned his focus to Caldwell. Badge and gun. Now, Caldwell felt the pounding of his pulse in his ears. Wait, no. Caldwell knew better than to contest. His fingers fumbled with the clasp of his holster as he unhooked his belt. Removing his weapon, it felt wrong to relinquish it. But the expression in Briggs's eyes warned him there was no escape from this. His hands trembled as he unpinned his badge. The same badge he had worn with pride for over 2 decades. He placed both items into Briggs's outstretched hand. But the moment they slipped away from him, it felt as though his entire identity had been stripped away. Briggs nodded sharply. You're relieved of duty pending investigation. Leave the scene now. Caldwell clenched his jaw, simmering with rage, humiliation, and sheer disbelief as it burned within him. But he recognized that there was no fighting this. Not here. Not now. He turned, dodging the gaze of a crowd and the cameras still filming. Regina observed his departure, witnessing the downfall of a man who believed he was untouchable. But the storm was not yet fully over. Regina watched as Caldwell walked away, his back rigid, hands clenched into fists. A man who had wielded power like a weapon throughout his career was now stripped of it. In full view of an entire neighborhood, the crowd offered no cheers. There was no celebration, just the heavy silence of what had almost transpired. Briggs turned back to Regina. Would you like to press charges? Regina contemplated the question, the older version of herself, the one who had long ago learned to choose her battles, to sidestep unnecessary conflict. Might have answered no, might have let it go, but that version of herself no longer existed. She thought of the women who wouldn't have received the opportunity to speak out, those whose names had become headlines, the ones who never returned home. Yes, she affirmed, her voice unwavering. I want him held accountable. Briggs nodded. We'll take it from here. The crowd began to dissipate slowly. But this moment would resonate far beyond this street. By the time Regina arrived home, the video was already circulating. Her phone buzzed with notifications, friends, colleagues, even journalists. And then, finally, Samuel. She answered, already detecting the tension in his voice. Regina, he said, his tone deliberately controlled. Are you okay? She exhaled. I am. Silence descended. Then something colder. What's his name? Regina closed her eyes, bracing for what was coming. It's already being handled. Samuel didn't respond right away. He was already making his own calls. By morning, Ethan Caldwell was the talk of the nation. His name adorned all headlines. His actions dissected in every newsroom. The footage capturing him pulling a gun on an unarmed woman, the wife of the FBI director, was everywhere. And Regina? She wasn't merely a victim in this narrative. She served as a testament that power doesn't render you untouchable. That accountability arrives, sooner or later, and that irrespective of who you are. Your badge, your title, or your years of service. There are lines that remain uncrossable. Regina sat on the edge of her bed, the weight of the day finally settling upon her. She had reached home, But far too many others hadn't. She glanced at her phone, overwhelmed by the influx of support, outrage, the calls for justice, and for the first moment that night, she allowed herself to breathe. For this time, the right individual lost. If you believe accountability matters, share this narrative. Allow people to witness the truth, to understand that power should never be wielded to silence the innocent. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more real stories that demand to be heard.